Today on Film Friday, I take a look at the 1989 classic Pet Sematary. Let's begin. Pet Sematary is a horror movie released in 1989, directed by Mary Lambert, who would go on to direct the Disney Channel original movie, Halloween Town 2: Calabar's Revenge. Strike number 1. Based off of the horror novel of the same name, it tells the story of Dr. Lewis Creed, who uprooted his family and himself from Chicago to take a gig at the University of Maine. Through ghosts and neighbors, he discovers a Native American burial ground hidden behind a pet cemetery created by kids back in the day, and discovers that it can bring the dead back to life. Then, when tragedy strikes, well, you know how white people be. The story was written by Stephen King and published 6 years prior, who also wrote the screenplay for this movie. Strike number 2. Now readers, I never really grew up with this movie, nor did I really see it as much as, let's just say, Stephen King's It miniseries. So I never really considered this a cult classic as much as everybody else has. Although I can definitely see this as something that I would have been scared of watching as a kid, only to look back at it when I got older and go, why the fuck was I scared of this? I was kinda that way with It when I was younger, but I watched it at a point in my development where I was right at the cusp of, I don't really need to immediately run up the stairs after I turn off the basement lights so that I don't get caught by whatever's down there, so the scares didn't really resonate with me. And unfortunately, with this being my first time seeing the movie, I kinda envy those who can even classify this in the it's so bad it's good cult horror folder, because I can't even. And not even because it wasn't scary, but because it wasn't good. Like, even for all of their schlock and camp after the first one, at least the Nightmare on Elm Street movies were various degrees of entertaining. And I don't think it's good for a lot of reasons other than the horror element. There are a lot of things both in front of the camera and behind the camera that played a factor for me. Part of the reasons were the 2 strikes I gave this movie earlier on in my beginning blurb of this video. So let's start with the first one, director Mary Lambert. Readers, this was Mary Lambert's second gig as a director, with her first one being an indie film named Siesta starring Jodie Foster, Martin Sheen, and Grace Jones, another movie based on a novel, this one by Patrice Chaplin. Before then, she was known more for directing music videos. And trust me, considering the artists she worked with and the videos she directed, she clearly knew what the fuck she was doing. And I assure you, this is not me bashing Mary Lambert in the slightest. There were a few things as far as what she wanted to do and how she wanted to do it that worked, in my opinion. I'm mostly talking about Rachel's flashbacks with Zelda and how she was able to use her music video background to make that one of the most memorable scenes in this movie. Then there'd be scenes that felt too much like an 80s music video instead of an actual movie, if that makes any sense. It's kind of like watching early Michael Bay stuff, and you can just tell through certain shots and scenes, cinematography aside, that they were just pulled from a car commercial. Because he used to direct car commercials? However, the difference between Bay and Lambert this early in the game for her is that despite us making fun of Bay for the Michael Bay-isms he presents in his films, he had enough experience under his belt with both commercials and movies alike to get his actors in his movies to properly emote. That being said, watching the results of Lambert's direction with her actors in Pet Sematary was a monotonic nightmare. There's Ellie, who constantly felt like she was trying too hard to get me to believe she was a kid.
Daddy, look, this one's a goldfishy.
There's Lewis, who has no personality and the most confusing relationship with his wife Rachel ever. Because of their lack of emoting and direction over the course of this movie, there are parts of it where I genuinely thought that they were on the verge of a separation or some shit because of their body language and how they both talked and looked at each other. Then in the next scene, or even the next few frames, I'd see them happy together or confiding in each other in a way that implies that no such problems ever existed. I was confused as all hell. And speaking of Rachel, oh, Jesus Christ. Rachel was a waste of potential, but I'll elaborate more on that in a little bit. Honestly, the only acting exception in this movie was 3-year-old Michael Hughes as Gage Creed. Both as a regular human and a born-again abomination, that little boy was so great.
Got you something, Mommy.
But after learning what I learned about this movie, I can't really lay all the blame on Mary Lambert. I have to give at least some of it to my second strike, the fact that Stephen King had so much creative control. I think it's very clear the difference between a Stephen King adaptation involving Stephen King versus a Stephen King adaptation not involving Stephen King. You have 1980's The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, with the screenplay by Kubrick and Diane Johnson that ends up becoming a staple in visual storytelling, versus Stephen King's 3-part Shining miniseries that made me question humanity. Then you have his other miniseries that he heavily involved himself in, like The Langoliers and Rose Red, because surprisingly enough, Stephen King had little to no involvement with the adaptation of It that the majority of us grew up with. The majority of the film adaptations of Stephen King's work that I'm a fan of are the ones where he has no involvement in. Kubrick's The Shining, Misery, It Chapter 1. So when I saw that Stephen King was allowed to write the screenplay for Pet Sematary, then found out that he and Mary Lambert had a synergized relationship when it came to what I saw on screen, I immediately became terrified. For the wrong reasons. Mostly due to the stuff that was in the book that he changed for the screenplay, or just flat out eliminated, that would have made Lewis and Rachel a lot more compelling in my opinion. For example, the neighbor of the Creeds, Judd Crandall, had a wife in the book that needed medical attention, and Lewis saves her before Rachel and the kids go to Chicago for Thanksgiving. This helps the two grow close and form a more believable friendship and bond later on down the line, especially when shit hits the fan. Well, the movie replaces her with Missy, a maid that handles the Creed's laundry and suffers heavily from TMitis.
Always thought it would be lucky to marry a doctor. Wish I had a doctor around with my stomach pain so bad. Guess I'll never be lucky. Hell, I ain't married anyone.
Why did you think sharing that was okay, Missy?
Bye, Missy.
She later on hangs herself in the basement of her home. For no reason at all, from what we, the audience, can figure out. And it's not like the story or the characters are impacted in any way possible, because they just continue on with their lives without her as if she was never there to begin with. Now you can't argue that she was there to show Ellie that death was just as important as life for her character, since she attended her funeral with Lewis and Judd. But instead, it's just washed away. And outside of giving her some traditional Stephen King anti-God tirade that goes nowhere and is kinda out of the blue for someone like her, Ellie is continued to be overprotected when Lewis and Judd take Church the cat to be resurrected at the Native American burial ground, because according to Judd, she's just too young to be introduced to the concept of death in the form of her losing a pet, when she clearly wasn't too young to attend the funeral of her maid who killed herself. And then there's Rachel, where through her parents and her sister Zelda, there was definitely an effort to make her an interesting character. But it's like I stated before, Denise Crosby's performance suffered from a lack of direction. Like, the moment I saw her when they entered the pet cemetery, I could tell that there was more she wanted to emote, more that she wanted to display. It clearly reminded her of a moment in her past that the book went into that could have easily made it into the movie, but it didn't. Like, it's obvious that the main themes in Pet Sematary are loss and guilt. Lewis handles loss by trying to reclaim control to get shit back to the way it used to. And Rachel deals with the guilt she lived with letting her sister Zelda die. I mean, yes, we do get it. But in order for her to come across as a well-rounded character in this movie, we don't get enough of it. And to be honest, we don't get enough time with Rachel to even care about her guilt. Whatever it is that we get in this movie is extremely short-lived because the focus is on Lewis for the majority of the movie, and once again, because of the lack of direction and emotion portrayed, he's just so fucking boring. Readers, I wish I could see the appeal of this movie. I truly do. I wish I grew up with this being a cult classic, or even being able to file this under the rest of my so bad it's good movies. But as a 30-year-old man seeing this movie for the first time, and knowing that the director's lack of experience and Stephen King's ultimate control of the project pretty much made this a perfect storm, this 1989's Pet Sematary, to quote one of the lines in this movie, ain't natural. Right now, if you want, you can stream Stephen King's Pet Sematary on Hulu, rent it on YouTube and Google Play for up to $3, and Vudu and iTunes for up to $4. But if you'd prefer to wait for the most recent adaptation, and if that's the case, then I cannot blame you. You can catch the non-Stephen King involved remake of Pet Sematary in theaters April 5th, 2019. So with that being said, readers, your homework assignment for the day. Write in the comments section below what you thought of Stephen King's Pet Sematary if you've seen it. Film Friday is possible thanks to the generous support of fellow readers over on Patreon. So if you want to see more and financially help the channel, you can join it by clicking the card at the end of the video or in the link in the description down below, where you can also find a link to my merchandise store. Or if you prefer to give one-time donations, you can find the links to my PayPal and my Ko-fi account in the description box as well. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because I post new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday. But until then, this is Readus 101. Class dismissed.
I don't wanna be buried in a pet cemetery.